Ecuador's Confederation of Indigenous Nationalities met with President Guillermo Lasso on Thursday to discuss rising fuel prices and the government's economic policy. Contrary to the Western media attacks, Belarus is willing to provide aid to asylum seekers who are attempting to cross into the European Union through Poland's borders. This Thursday, Angola celebrates its Independence Day, marking the 46th anniversary of the end of Portuguese colonial rule in 1975. From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm Katrina Goss. We begin in Ecuador, where the Confederation of Indigenous Nationalities met with President Guillermo Lasso on Thursday to discuss rising fuel prices and the government's economic policy. The meeting, part of the second round of talks, concluded without reaching agreement, but some progress was made on the control of the prices of agricultural inputs. The dialogue comes amid tensions after indigenous movements staged several protests over fuel price rises amid a state of emergency declared by the executive, which led to the militarization of parts of the country where the protests were taking place and violent state repression of demonstrators. The meeting lasted about 6 hours, during which the parties failed to reach a consensus on fuel prices and decided to hold another meeting within 2 weeks.
There have been advances on many of the 6 points proposed for this meeting. On the issue of fuel prices, the national government will review internationally what they can do. In that sense, this organization hopes that in 15 days we will have an answer on the proposed fuel prices.
800 people who form part of a migrant caravan crossing Mexico have regularized their situation in the country with the help of the authorities and desisted from continuing the dangerous journey north. The National Institute of Migration provided humanitarian visitors cards to foreign citizens who are in vulnerable conditions and voluntarily decided to abandon the caravan. The mainly Central American nationals who benefited from this measure are now in the southern state of Oaxaca, where they are considering their options. Mexico saw a record number of people crossing its territory to reach the United States in September. The government continues to urge the United States to meet its commitments to provide financing for programs in Central America to provide job opportunities and tackle poverty to allow people to stay in their home countries. The Chilean Senate will begin deliberations on President Sebastián Piñera's impeachment next Tuesday, November 16th, over revelations contained in the Pandora Papers investigation. The committee presenting the case will have 1 hour before the defense presents its case. The vote on whether to proceed with the impeachment, which was approved in the lower house but requires the approval of the Senate to happen, will take place the same afternoon. Senators will have a maximum of 15 minutes to argue the decision in favor or against. The constitutional accusation against Piñera needs 29 votes to be endorsed by the Senate, something analysts believe is highly unlikely to happen as the president enjoys majority support in the upper house. Workers of the Ministry of Social Development of Uruguay announced the decision to cancel several social programs that assisted the most vulnerable sectors of the population. Our correspondent Mateo Grill brings us more details in the following report.
Workers of the Ministry of Social Development of Uruguay staged a symbolic funeral of social policies. They carried out a strike and mobilized to denounce the elimination of a dozen social programs that assisted the most vulnerable sectors of the population in the country.
We are denouncing the state's withdrawal of social policies on the ground of the continuous work with the people, which is what really contributes to overcome poverty, and a ministry that is only focusing on paternalism, handing out basic goods, vouchers, and food, but that is not really concerned with generating opportunities for the people.
The workers denounced the cancellation of some of the most successful programs of the ministry, such as Uruguay Trabaja, which created opportunities for social inclusion through work. The Elderly Assistance Program, which provided a monthly subsidy equivalent to an old-age pension, or Jóvenes en Red, a socio-educational and labor program that sought to promote the rights of adolescents and young people who were neither studying nor working, among others.
During this year and a half of government, we have experienced the termination of programs that are extremely important for the welfare of citizens, especially those related to the support of families in vulnerable situations, the work with young people, the work of people who are dependent and disabled, but also a cutback in economic support, the disappearance of a ministry from a local community.
In addition to the social impact of the termination of these programs, there are also short-term labor consequences. Hundreds of members of the technical staff at the Ministry of Development have already been dismissed, and others have been transferred to administrative jobs.
There are many programs that have resulted in the dismissal of workers who become unemployed, and there are others whose tasks are in fact greatly reduced. Many of the tasks become simply administrative and not social work, which they were trained to do in the field with the population.
Workers denounced that the authorities of the Ministry of Development opt for a clientelist and paternalist policy, to the detriment of real social policies for the development of the Uruguayan people. Since the government of Luis Lacalle Pou took office, poverty in Uruguay has increased by more than 30%. Destitution has doubled and unemployment has risen. In this scenario, which requires a greater state presence, the government has decided to terminate social assistance programs.
Mateo Grille, teleSUR, Montevideo, Uruguay.
8 Amazon countries, members of the Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization, have launched the Amazon Regional Observatory, a reference center for information on the region. The observatory also deals with themes like biodiversity, species listed in the convention, forests, water resources and indigenous peoples. Installed at Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization headquarters, the observatory promotes access to information produced by the 8 member countries: Bolivia, Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Guyana, Peru, Suriname and Venezuela. It also fosters the flow and exchange of data among institutions, government authorities, the scientific and academic community and civil society in the Amazonian countries. And we'll be right back after this very short break. Don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. Belarus is willing to provide aid to asylum seekers who are attempting to cross into the European Union through Poland's borders. After meeting with Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, Education Minister Igor Karpenko announced that at-risk people, including women and children, could be placed at a children's recreational camp as the cold season arrives in order to protect them. Pregnant women will also be provided with hospital services. The international attention regarding people seeking to cross into Poland from Belarus forms part of the escalating Western media campaign against the Belarusian government and coincides with increased European Union sanctions against the country. And Belarus's President Alexander Lukashenko vowed to respond to any new sanctions imposed over the presence of asylum seekers on the country's border with Poland, including by potentially cutting off the transit of natural gas to Europe.
We have increased the volumes of natural gas pumped via Belarus. The Yamal-Europe pipeline is full. We are hitting Europe and they are threatening that they will close the border. And what if we block the supply of natural gas there? If European Union countries impose additional sanctions on us, indigestible and unacceptable for us, we must respond.
China and the United States have agreed to boost climate cooperation over the next decade in a surprise announcement at the COP26 Climate Summit in the Scottish city of Glasgow.
The United States and China are releasing a joint declaration which lays out how we will limit warming on this planet and how together we'll take action here at the COP as well as in the years to come.
The release of this joint declaration shows again that cooperation is the only choice for both China and the United States. By working together, our two countries can achieve many important things that are beneficial not only to our two countries, but to the world as a whole, as two major powers in the world. China and the United States shoulder special international responsibilities and obligations. We need to think big and be responsible, and we need to work in line with the global trend and work hard to promote world peace and development.
And from Glasgow, our special correspondents Ian Bruce and Sabrina Fernandez bring us more details on developments at the COP26 summit as the event draws to a close.
Hello and welcome to the COP26 Coalition in Glasgow. I'm Sabrina Fernandez.
And I'm Ian Bruce, and this is Inside Outside, your daily look at what's going on inside the COP26 and outside in the struggle for climate justice. Wednesday, the 10th of November, was the last day of the People's Summit and the anti-penultimate day of the COP26 itself. the moment when the UK presidency published a draft text of a so-called agreement. That didn't impress these protesters much, still out on the streets of Glasgow. This action, organised by Extinction Rebellion, was targeting JP Morgan, the dirtiest bank on the planet, and demanding it stop financing fossil fuels. And this was Storm, the goddess of the sea, made out of recycled plastic, who's walked all around Scotland to raise awareness of the environmental crisis. She was welcomed by school kids chanting climate justice.
The big news inside the COP was the publication early on Wednesday morning of a draft of a final agreement, what in the language of these UN summits is called a cover decision. This is in fact made up of 3 texts to cover each of the UN bodies that is meeting here in Glasgow. And it's not really an agreement at all, more of a political statement, a long wish list of things the UK presidency wants countries to agree are necessary and urgent, but with little or nothing in the way of concrete steps to achieve them.
We spoke to 2 founders of the COP26 coalition who've been following this process for many years on the inside and the outside. They are Mary Church from Friends of the Earth Scotland and Dorothy Guerrero of Global Justice Now. So what did they make of the draft text?
So what we're seeing with these texts that have come out in the early hours of this morning is that they're really stripped of all references to equity. So those principles of common but differentiated responsibility that are enshrined in the UNFCCC, enshrined in the convention, what we're seeing is a splitting of the mitigation actions and the finance actions. We've also seen language creep into these texts around a global goal for net zero. Now this is really worrying. It's not in the Paris Agreement. It erodes the equity that exists within the Paris Agreement. Rich historical polluters who've done most to cause the crisis really have to cut their emissions furthest and fastest, and that needs to be over the next decade, with more time for countries who've done least to cause the crisis and are on the front lines of the crisis to bring down their emissions.
It is disappointing. It is very depressing, of course, but we see that coming because from the discussions on climate finance last week and the discussions on science, they're really zeroing in on all these nature-based solutions, and then also really putting emphasis on the fact that there's promises, there's all these figures, they're really, really big, but it's stripped of policy as well, because if you ask how will they deliver it, it's so unclear.
And I think the other thing that we're really worried to see in there is language, and this appears 3 times in the cover decision, in the COP cover decision, language on nature-based solutions, which sounds like, motherhood and apple pie. Who could possibly object to nature-based solutions? But actually, this is, a really dangerous concept that has been put forward by the likes, the big polluters. Shell, for example, is amongst its biggest fans. And nature cannot possibly compensate for the harm that we are doing and the harm that is locked in the plans of countries and big polluters over the course of the next 10 to 20 years. We simply have to phase out fossil fuels. We cannot just say nature is going to fix all of this for us.
And also the sources of the climate finance, where it will go to international financial institutions, it will go through all these corporations that are greenwashing and will be given a role to manage this finance. It will not be given to countries to manage.
Assad Raymond also spoke in the high-level plenary of the UN Climate Summit here in Glasgow on behalf of the COP26 coalition, and he responded to what is on offer from the government's meeting today.
Whilst we are frustrated and angry, we are not without hope. We know it's ordinary people who change history, and we will change history. Thank you, Chair.
On the inside, we'll see in the course of these final 2 days of COP26 how far the governments of the Global South are prepared to go in opposing what's on offer.
Bolivia has already slammed the cover text, saying that it assumes that nature is at the service of human needs. And Algeria also denounced that the text shifts responsibility onto developing countries.
And outside, the opposition is clear for all to see.
So that's all for today's Inside Outside. Thank you for joining us.
See you tomorrow.
And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. This Thursday, Angola celebrates its Independence Day, marking another anniversary of the end of Portuguese colonial rule in 1975. Addressing the nation on the eve of the anniversary, President of the Republic of Angola, João Lourenço, stated that by proclaiming independence, Angolans became free and equal, the masters of their own destiny. The first movement towards independence for Angola began in the 1950s with the creation of political groups fighting for self-determination. A guerrilla war for independence led by the People's Movement for the Liberation of Angola lasted almost 15 years until independence was declared in 1975. Despite the declaration, Angola faced an ongoing struggle to free itself completely from imperialist interests, an effort in which Cuba played a key role, helping to prevent the advance of the apartheid regime of South Africa and also securing the independence of neighbouring Namibia. According to authorities, a death toll following a devastating fuel tanker explosion last week in Sierra Leone's capital, Freetown, has risen to 131. A spokesperson for the National Disaster Management Agency said another 63 people were still being treated in 4 Freetown hospitals, 19 of whom are in a critical condition. The tragedy occurred on Friday on a busy junction in Wellington, eastern Freetown, when a fuel tanker was hit by a truck, which later caught fire. Victims included motorcycle drivers who rushed to collect leaking fuel coming from the tanker, roadside traders and commuters trapped in minibuses that were backed up along the usually busy road. And the president of Sierra Leone, Julius Maada Bio, expressed condolences during a funeral service for 85 of the victims of last week's fuel tanker explosion.
We then one for make the bereaved family, the one that will lost people then directly, may they know say this not a loss for Salone, not just a loss for them. And for me they take heart and also get faith that we as a country, we commend all of the one that we don't pass to God, the Almighty, for making go get mercy on them and grant them merciful judgment.
At least 3 people were killed and several others wounded when a suicide bomber rammed his car into a security convoy in the Somali capital Mogadishu on Thursday. The attack took place at a busy intersection near Villa Baidoa, the Somali military's second headquarters in the city. According to a police officer, the bomb blast targeted a convoy carrying personnel of the African Union mission in the country. He added that the wounded were transported to nearby Mandina Hospital. No group has yet claimed responsibility for the attack, but the Somali-based Al-Qaeda-affiliated terrorist group Al-Shabaab has claimed many recent attacks in the country. The attack came hours after a roadside bomb blast wounded at least 3 policemen in Mogadishu. The legacy of Yasser Arafat lives on among the Palestinian people 17 years after his death. This November 11th marks the anniversary of the first president of Palestine and Nobel laureate's death. Arafat passed away at age 75 in the military hospital of Percy, Paris, after a month of illness, allegedly due to polonium poisoning. His struggle for the liberation of the Palestinian people from the Zionist regime began in 1958 when he founded Fatah, the National Liberation Movement. In 1996, he became president of the Palestinian Authority and served as chairman of the Palestine Liberation Organization from 1969. He's remembered as one of the leading figures of the Palestinian struggle.
Today I come bearing an olive branch in one hand and the weapon of a freedom fighter in the other. Don't let the olive branch fall out of my hand. I repeat, don't let
These 3 people were killed and several others wounded when a suicide bomber rammed his car.
My hand. I repeat, don't let the olive branch fall out of my hand.
And we've come to the end of this news brief. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also follow us on social media for all the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Katrina Goss and thank you for watching.